We've got this as one of our fight of the night contenders. You have Moggly, Gabriel Benitez taking on the Guitar Hero, Justin Jaynes. Matt, this fight will be contested at lightweight. It has it on the UFC site. It has it on most sites. Justin Jaynes referenced it in his interview with friend of the show, James Lynch. Shouts to our fellow Canadian. He also said that he had COVID before this fight, and Gabriel Benitez had COVID, so the first booking or original booking of this fight fell through. Both guys at one point had COVID. Kind of crazy. All right, Matt. So we talk about this one at 155 pounds. Gabriel Benitez, in his last time out, took on Omar Morales on relative short notice. Now, Morales was booked to take on Alexander Hernandez a couple weeks before. The card fell out because of the state of the world. So later on, back in Jacksonville, in steps Gabriel Benitez. And Matt, this gets referenced all the time. The fact that Javier Mendez has said that Gabriel Benitez is one of the hardest kickers, if not the hardest kicker that he's ever had at the American Kickboxing Academy. And more so than Luke Rockhold. Now, the crazy thing about it, Gabriel Benitez had a Luke Rockhold-esque injury in his last fight against Omar Morales. I've rarely seen shins get cut open that bad. Yes, I'm wearing flip-flops. Then Gabriel Benitez, he cracked that shin open really badly in that fight. Almost reminiscent, Matt, we talked about this before the video, of one Mr. Mark Hunt. Now, Gabriel Benitez loves to shoot that back leg forward, loves to whip those kicks out there, and that can definitely cause problems for a lot of guys. Now, Justin Jaynes coming into this fight, coach at Extreme Couture. He's had a wild 2020, came in on short notice at the Apex, taking on Frank the Crank Camacho, knocked him out in about 41 seconds. So the world's his oyster, the sky's the limit. Then he goes on to take on Canada's, the Maritime's own, Gavin Tucker. And what a wild fight, Matt. I mean, Gavin Tucker got a knockdown in that one, earned a takedown, submitted him. It was an amazing fight and a great performance for Gavin Tucker. And it's kind of crazy because in Justin Jaynes' first fight against Frank Camacho, he earned a performance of the night. Jaynes did. In the next fight, Gavin Tucker earned a performance of the night. So kind of both ends of the spectrum. Justin Jaynes, primarily known as a wrestler, spent 4 years wrestling at Olivet College in Michigan, before kind of moving on to greener pastures, moving into MMA and coaching Extreme Couture. And I mean, we can go through the roster of guys that have kind of spent time there, but the Benil Dariush's, the Giga Chikadzes, the Dan Egates, and so on and so forth. Misha Tate, Randy Couture. Like, there's been a lot of really good fighters that have trained there, and especially recently, Justin Jaynes working on that pedigree there. I love this fight stylistically. I think it's going to be a really good one. What do you make of this fight here?
Okay, so you say Justin Jaynes is a wrestler, and he is, but he doesn't really fight like a wrestler. He isn't going to be going for a lot of double legs on Gabriel Benitez. And if he does, that's going to be a very bad idea for a reason I'll bring up in a second. But Justin Jaynes is a good example of, I'm going to use the term, he is like Justin Gaethje, where he's going to use that defense. He's going to use his wrestling much more in a defensive style. He does have sort of that, you know, to go really old school, a Chuck Liddell style where, yes, he's got good wrestling credentials, but it's mainly used to stuff the opponent's takedowns and then throw offense of his own. The weird thing about that, though, is Gavin Tucker was able to out-wrestle Justin Jaynes, but Justin Jaynes was able to outstrike Gavin Tucker on the feet and actually drop Tucker at one point. So it's really weird because when you do look at Justin Jaynes, kind of the sum of his components don't really make up who he is as an MMA fighter, because when he is more in his element, he's that big power puncher. He can get into those brawls. The jiu-jitsu is something that worries me a little bit because Gavin Tucker, once that fight hit the mat, he was able to really implement his game plan. Now, is that Gavin Tucker's a phenomenal grappler? And I'm sure he is. Or is Justin Jaynes one of those cases where my wrestling's good, but maybe I didn't spend enough time in the whole jiu-jitsu aspect, kind of like Sarah McMahon? Now, I'm not going to jump to those kinds of conclusions. But if this fight does hit the mat, I favor Gabriel Benitez quite a bit. Benitez has phenomenal chokes. He will go for arm bars sometimes and then give up top positions, something you have to worry about, especially with a guy like Justin Jaynes. If he's able to get on top of Gabriel Benitez, I think the ground and pound could give Benitez some issues. And this is a classic fight of whoever's either backing up or whoever's off their back is the one who's going to be in the most trouble. And I know that's easy to say, but especially in this fight, if Justin Jaynes is able to get Gabriel Benitez's back up against the cage, he's really going to limit some of that movement that Benitez is known for, that really good side to side. And he will be able to unload some of those bigger shots. We saw Sadiq Youssef was able to do it against Gabriel Benitez. The difference is Youssef will kind of go body and to the head. He does have sort of these Paulo Costa combinations where he's not just the head hunter. He will mix it up, go body, leg, and then to the head when that opens up. If Benitez is on the back foot against Jaynes, I worry about Jaynes just sort of recklessly crashing forward. It's something that he does do. He does like to duck his head and throw with power, and that's great if you are able to land those shots over the top. And with a guy like Benitez who does stand kind of upright, it could be devastating if he does land some of those big shots. But Benitez throws perfect punches down the middle. He is much more of a straight puncher than a looping shot kind of guy. And I think the best example of this in MMA was when the Korean Zombie fought Jose Aldo way back when. Because the Korean Zombie, especially at that point, he wasn't as crisp of a technician with his boxing as he is now. And he just threw looping shots where Jose Aldo just went down the middle every single time. And he could get from point A to point B quite a bit faster. So Justin Jaynes is really loading up on his shots. Gabriel Benitez can just kind of outspeed him. Play that volume game instead of I'm just going to try and knock you out with one shot. And I do think as the fight goes on, that damage is really going to accumulate. The body kicks of Benitez is going to get to you. I think the straight shots are going to eventually get to you. And I do think a big shot will open up later on in the fight.
And I mean, Matt, I went back and watched some of Justin Jaynes' fights from the regional scene. A good example, the Brandon Noble fight, but really the James Warfield Lane fight. Again, dipping your head, throwing a wild shot, and then when he gets his opponent down, he can really use position from an open guard perspective to land a lot of shots. He's great from a full guard position. He has really good ground and pound. For Justin Jaynes, if we have a look at the odds, open a -115 favorite. He's now a +162 underdog. Gabriel Benitez, one of the biggest movers so far, and it's early on this card. Benitez open a +115. He's now -197. If we look over in Tapology, again, limited sample size, 462 total votes, 63% going Justin Jaynes, 79% going with Jaynes to win by knockout. Matt, we had a fight really similar to this fight, stylistically somewhat, but where the odds and the Tapology votes, everything didn't really kind of gel together. Luke Sanders, when he fought Nate Maness on the last card, opening the prelims, it was a lot like that. And it was really interesting to see. I see that kind of similarity here. The other thing, again, both guys had COVID, so will it play a factor? I have no idea. I'm not a doctor. The other thing that I do know, at lightweight, Gabriel Benitez in his career, 13-3 fighting at 155. For Justin Jaynes, 12-3, that according to MMA Form Guide. Overall, it's a great fight, Matt. I mean, Justin Jaynes coming in, the orthodox stance, crashing forward. Gabriel Benitez, known as a really crisp striker. Great southpaw, those whipping kicks. Again, Javier Mendez is going to play up his guy because you gotta. But Gabriel Benitez does fight like that. Now, the only issue, again, in Benitez's last 5, 2-3, we look at the wins, Matt, Jason Knight and Humberto Bandenay. And I know Bandenay no longer in the UFC, and neither is Jason Knight. That Jason Knight performance is great.
Oh yeah, he looked amazing in that fight. Now, there are a few little X factors in this fight that I'm a little concerned about. Justin Jaynes' power could get to Benitez. Benitez, to me, is like Derek Favors. I always thought he'd be a little bit better, but he's not bad by any means. And for Benitez, if he is the one on the back foot, I am concerned if he does get backed up to the cage. You know how good of a power puncher Justin Jaynes is, so if he is able to start unloading with those combinations, I'm a little worried, but here's the great news. I think if Benitez starts really well and wins the first round, it's just going to keep on getting better for him. The real question is, how long is it going to take him to kind of judge the timing of Justin Jaynes? Another thing that I always really like too, if you have a kick-dominant fighter in southpaw fighting a primary boxer who's going to be in the orthodox position, that opens up the liver kick wide open. And with a guy like Gabriel Benitez, who isn't afraid to just throw those kicks with reckless abandon, I can see that shot being open all fight long. And I really like the skill set of Gabriel Benitez in this one.
Matt, I looked up those pictures of Gabriel Benitez's shin after he fought Omar Morales. Don't look them up. I won't put them here. Don't look them up. But they sewed it up pretty good. It looked all right after the fact. So hopefully Gabriel Benitez at 100%. That shin's all well and healed. And I agree with you, Matt, in this one. I am going with Gabriel Benitez as well. But overall, this is a great fight. And Justin Jaynes certainly has a chance in this one. Great wrestler, great forward pressure. And we saw it with Gabriel Benitez in his last fight with Omar Morales. First round went really well for Gabriel Benitez. Omar Morales kept going. I really think his future's at lightweight. Don't go back down to featherweight, Omar, please. But overall, there's certainly a path to victory for Justin Jaynes. We're both going with Gabriel Benitez here in a possible fight of the night. It should be a barn burner. You're going to want to keep locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, because we have a great card coming up on Saturday, headlined by Marvin Vettori, coming in on short notice to take on Jack Hermansson. So as I said, Matt, keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, and as we always say, let's get into it.